people will overlook a lot if they believe they're going to get rich. They will just overlook everything about Sam Altman's past and his history. Every piece of information that you have, they will overlook it if he's winning and you think you're going to get rich with the guy.
Okay, Harry, we're back. The Future Proof podcast is rolling again. It's Sunday, May 3rd, and it's around 7:30 Pacific Standard Time, and it's a lovely day for you.
Yeah, a little later for me, 10:30 in the morning, back here on the East Coast. Great day. Going to be a fun day.
It's been just a crazy. This week feels like a month to me in AI. I don't know about you, but it's just there's so much packed stuff going on. And in business in general, I don't know, there was so much going on. I don't know if I tuned out and I was just focused in, but I think you put together a really great outline. You wrote some bangers this week. Let's just jump in.
Yeah, it was a good week. And I think every week it feels like this. It's just, there's just a lot going on. The pace of change is exceptional. It seems to be increasing. You had a little drama, this week.
With a lot of drama. With
the Musk Altman trial getting some coverage and sort of flowing over into, it got out of AI Twitter and actually into the mainstream since everyone knows the players.
You know what's interesting on that point there is because we're so deep into this and we're talking to people making stuff and buying and building. When I see it in mainstream press, I'm always I'm almost shocked, the way that the rudimentariness of the discussion, or it's like as if it's news. And I just keep failing to realize that I'm so deep in that 99, literally 9 nines to, no one cares about this stuff. And so when I see it in normal news, I'm like, oh, wow, that's why it's so, it's like,
yeah.
But,
well, I wrote a piece about, about a tiki bar, a week and a half ago or something like that. And that was my take that night, which was, everyone covers this stuff so breathlessly, and we're so deep into it on a day-to-day basis that when you actually take a step outside of it and just, go to what I'll just say, normal life for a second, you realize that most people don't think about this every second of every day. They're not living it. They're not sitting in front of a Claude terminal. They're not writing code. They don't have their Mac Mini open. They're and they're just, sort of normal folks going about their normal lives. And you're like, oh my God, but did you see this? And what did you miss there? And it's pretty interesting. I'll give you a good example exactly of that. I'm on the board of a company called WM Technologies. As you know, Weed Maps is their product. It's the, sort of the largest marketplace for cannabis products in the country. And at the board meeting, the CEO rolled out a sort of a strategy deck. And there are a number of people on the board, and a couple of us sort of looked at it and said, hey, great. I'm glad to see it roll out. Love to see more details, because we had all immersed ourselves so deeply in the marketplace that, this was sort of a high level deck for us. But if you weren't high level, then you looked at this deck and go, oh my God, finally, some strategy. And you sort of say, okay, yeah, kind of. But if you're that deep in, you're sort of like, okay, but yeah, where are the details on, because there's a lot of stuff here and there's a lot of information to really, and I know that, let's face it, the management team there knows the business better than any of us will ever know it.
Yeah.
So that whatever's on those slides are a, 1/10 of 1% of what they know. And I think that's, kind of what you see in the coverage. It's sort of like you see coverage in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, and you look and you go, okay, that's a nice article for the masses. And then you say, yeah, well, I know 10 times more than that writer does. And then you go and you look and you say, well, you know what, like Mira Murati and Ilya Sutskever and, all these other people, they know 10 times more than we do, because they're actually the ones doing it.
Yeah, exactly. And in part, that's why I think why we do this is when people read an article written by someone in the Wall Street Journal, and some of those guys are, folks are extraordinarily detailed and wise, but that might just be like a one article that they're writing. You know what I mean? They might not be really studying it. And I feel like when I saw all this start happening, I really thought we need a team that's just going to study this constantly and write about it constantly. and sharpen our knives. So when we engage with business executives, we're not really sort of wave tips. We're like deep ocean explorers. And we could express the wave tip, but we can also explain the tide underneath these wave tips and why they're actually even emerging in this territory. And you know, let's get to it, because I think that Musk trial and the Altman trial are showing sort of, I think, a real dispute, but it has nothing to do with AI, really. Do you know what I mean? It's
No,
like
it's a pure business dispute.
It's a business dispute, but I personally continue to side with Musk on it, even though I don't know him and I don't know Sam Altman. But I just on principle, it just seems like, hey, the guy put $50 million in, sort of. I don't know, you might know the exact number.
He put in 40, I think it was.
$40 million in saying it's, and as I recall, Musk's story was like he was talking to a fellow over at Google, and Google was just like, yeah, whatever, like maybe humans go away. And Musk was like, whoa, that's kind of crazy. I don't like that.
It's kind of grim, yeah.
Grim. And so he was like, let's build an AI that's literally open. And I feel like whether people like Elon Musk or not, or believe him or anything like that, if that's the evidence that's being provided, I'm on that side. And then as the company run by Sam Altman, whom I don't know, but I see his moves publicly or on Twitter, he always gives me a very unctuous feeling. And Musk gives me a different sort of feeling. So I side with him, and I'm like, look, if it's a charity, how can you take it private? I mean, I get all the maneuvers of business people saying, let's take it private because there's billions of dollars. And I get that the company wants to hoover up billions of dollars to run the business, but it just seems on principle alone that that's not the right thing to do. And Musk has a real position. No matter what found emails are found, principles are principles. First principles are important. Where do you want to go with that? What do you think?
Yeah, look, I tend to agree. I mean, I think there's a lot of legal minutia that you could go through. And most of the points that Musk was trying to make have been thrown out by the court, right? Most of the things he's argued have been thrown out by the court. But at the end of the day, the question is, did they effectively, hijack a charity, a nonprofit corporation, and turn it into a for-profit and take it over? And I think the answer is, very much yes. I mean,
It has to be.
Someone said, like, for the love of God, like, what grown man keeps a journal?
Yeah.
And,
what was the
Greg
Greg's
Brockman's,
quote?
I mean, it was just,
it was like the morality of stealing a company or something like that.
yeah. I mean, it's all there, right? So, and I think it gets back to, stuff that we've written before, which is that, a lot of business is built around trust. Almost all business is built around trust. And a lot of times I think, I've certainly seen it on Wall Street. You see it in Silicon Valley. People will overlook a lot if they believe they're going to get rich. They will just overlook everything about Sam Altman's past and his history. Every piece of information that you have, they will overlook it if he's winning and you think you're going to get rich with the guy. And so, look, I wrote it and I said, maybe he is the Christie Brinkley of Silicon Valley, right? You get divorced once, everyone makes a mistake. You get divorced twice, maybe you were on the rebound, maybe you made a bad choice in an emotional, time. You get divorced the third time. I don't know, maybe you picked up with a younger person and they weren't as mature. I mean, okay. I mean, there's lots of excuses, but by the time you get to the fifth or sixth marriage, you got to look in the mirror and say it's probably you. And he clearly left Y Combinator under, I don't know.
Suspicious. I don't know if it was Paul Graham's not. I mean, I trust Paul Graham over. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, exactly. Paul Graham seems to, again, I don't know Paul Graham from a hole in the wall, but he, his writings and his reputation would suggest that he is completely trustworthy and cares about building companies and all the sort of little options granted to Sam and other companies while he was involved at Y Combinator just seemed to go against what they were trying to do. He leaves under a sort of a cloud, but he's a great teller of stories. He's a great salesperson, unbelievably great. But then you look and you say, here's Mira Murati. She left. Here's the Anthropic founders. They left. Here is Sutskever. He left to fund his company. Karpathy left. The board members tried to fire the guy, and then
They fired him, by the
You're
way.
right.
And Microsoft gave him safe harbor. I mean, do you know what I mean?
And I think for Microsoft, whether or not they believed him or whether or not they thought he was a good guy or a bad guy, I think they felt they needed to protect their investment.
I mean, I think that's the subplot here, which is if you're a venture capitalist or you're an investor, it's 99% not your money. So you have to protect your investment. And even if you bet on an untrustworthy person, you're like, well, the untrustworthy person still slayed dragons for me so I can get my money out and my LP's money back because I put this money in and I'm terrified that I'm going to lose it all. And so the system sort of aligns with how am I going to get my money out? Even if the guy's, even if everything's true about Sam, but you can just trust yourself. Just watch him talk. And how does it make you feel? And I don't feel like I'm dealing with someone who's being super trustworthy. When I listen to Dario talk, he talks with a little bit more convincing, alarmist. And when I listen, so it's like, I
think everybody talks their book to some degree. It's what everyone's always going to do. I think Musk's calling him Scam Altman.
Ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous on one hand, but on the other hand, you're like, yeah, that's kind of how I feel when I'm listening to him, right? So it's hard to get that out of your head. I mean, if I say Jeb Bush to you, what do you think? You think low energy, right? I mean, like almost immediately because
I don't know what to think. I'd fairly forget.
Right.
I don't know what it looks like, but
right. But I'm saying it sticks. And to your point, you got to look at the incentives for people. If you invest in OpenAI and you are one of 15 large funds that invest in OpenAI and it goes down because Anthropic comes up with a better product, chances are good that you will be forgiven. If you invest in OpenAI and it fails because you invested in someone who was fundamentally untrustworthy, it's harder for you to be forgiven. It's just much harder because your judgment gets called into question in a very different way all of a sudden. And I don't think anyone, certainly Microsoft, didn't want to have that happen.
I mean, yeah. I mean, it's too transformational of the technology, but on principles, I think suing. I think Elon's operating with some principle here.
Yeah, I do.
I think he did get scammed. I think
I think there's principle, and I think there's some vitriol
for sure
behind it as well.
Yeah, I mean,
because he feels like he got scammed. Now, was he offered? The trial's been interesting. Was he offered stock at some point? Was he offered ownership? Yes. Did he propose his own terms where he was the controlling shareholder? Yes. But at the end of the day, the whole point of this thing was that it was supposed to be a charity. It was supposed to be open, and it's turned into the exact opposite of that. And it looks like Elon put up, a bunch of the money, the ideas, all the original people. I mean, he was the founder of the company. He's got nothing.
I mean, and if you take that, you take Musk put the money up. He orchestrated it. It was Sam. I think Elon thought I'm gonna have Sam do my bidding, and I think Sam is. This is totally speculation. Sam is, just so gnarly. He said, I'm going to play Elon. He did sort of he did. He was like, I'm going to get this dude's money. I'm going to get his network and I'm going to get the best researchers literally in the world. And by the way, to Sam's credit, and this is just me reading, and I don't know what happened in these rooms, so it's all speculation. But with Sam's sort of crafty throw a million things at the wall, which is sort of like what Y Combinator did, invest in a lot of companies, small amounts, and see if you get a couple, diamonds. I don't think they would have discovered ChatGPT. Like the researchers are at odds with product-based CEOs because product-based CEOs are looking for hits. They're looking for hits, and researchers are on a discovery. They are bent in a different way, and they're looking for research hits, which may never go productized ever. And so there's this, and so OpenAI's success is due to probably Sam's craftiness. It's certainly due to Elon's first amount of money and saying, let's do this. But the researchers would have never done what Sam would have done. I think Dario's still at the heart of it as a researcher, and the productization of Claude Code comes from a developer inside the company. I don't think they even care about it,
right?
Frankly.
Yeah, it's interesting. It reminds me of there was a podcast I listened to, and I think we actually wrote about it at one point from Demis Hassabis, and he said maybe we shouldn't have taken all of this stuff public so much, and we should have left it kind of private for longer until we had cured cancer, per se, as opposed to giving you the world ChatGPT or Gemini or
And they
or
didn't, by the way. They let it sit on the shelf. It was these guys, the OpenAI guys, that figured it out. But ChatGPT was, by the way, I was using Playground. So I mean, I'm kind of a old dog. I was using Playground on like 1 or 2, and it was, I mean, you would see it. Like, and I remember people in my circles saying, "Oh man, this stuff is gonna do something. It's really cool." Like you could, I mean, I heard people saying it could do some writing for you. And when you went in there, it would just, I mean, it was like next predicted word would come out like it was really poor. Just you wouldn't necessarily know it was going to be something fantastic, but it hit the consumer when they released the first version of it that went out of Playground. It hit the consumer with so much sort of like, wow, like it wrote a paragraph for me. I gave it a line and it fed back. So it skipped that. It went straight to the consumer and the consumer loved it. But Google sat on it. So I actually think, the productization of it is actually probably due to Sam Altman. And I think that all the researchers bailed. And inside that world, even though Sam makes me feel anxious or gives me an anxious feeling, I think all the researchers are also precious angels. Do you know what I mean? That they probably were like, that's a toy.
Oh, of course. But, again, we live in a sort of a commercial world, and the researchers, they live in a lab. They don't want anything, they don't want anything to, bother them, so to speak.
But on the other side, in defense of researchers are never given enough compute and money to do the research. It's too expensive. If you went to a university, they don't have enough compute and energy. If you went to private sector, they don't have enough money or energy. And so if you're a researcher, top of the game, let's say you're Kobe Bryant of researching an AI, your demands aren't like pay me $10 million a day. Your demands are give me $5 billion worth of energy and compute a day so I can try to achieve my potential. And
Right.
no one is giving them that.
No.
Maybe Dennis Hassabis, maybe Google's giving their researchers that. But it's commercially unreasonable to give your researchers a blank check. But it's very commercially reasonable to give a guy like Sam Altman a blank check to chase productization of a technology. It's just, that's where we're at right now. That's the fight.
Excuse me.
Yeah, bless you.
It's funny. So the piece I wrote on Friday was called Heat, and it was taken from the movie of the same name. And I sort of put the famous diner scene in there, and
Great image.
And De Niro's back and forth with Al Pacino saying, I do what I do best. I take scores. You do what you do best. You try to stop guys like me. And De Niro sort of lays out his philosophy, which is, don't get attached to anything you can't walk out on in 30 seconds flat if you feel the heat around the corner. And they sort of discuss whether that's a lonely life or not. And I would argue that it is the sort of the primary way that most hedge fund managers operate, having been there with some great ones. But it's also, if you just get back to OpenAI, their biggest partner has been Microsoft, and Microsoft now restruck their deal.
Yeah, explain that for like maybe some of our listeners. It's sort of.
I mean, the original deal was that it was. OpenAI was effectively exclusive to Microsoft, and Microsoft was exclusive to it, and they were paying each other depending on what was being delivered, and it only became sort of open. The relationship would only become open when OpenAI declared that they had achieved AGI. So that's sometime in the future, and again, we can get down to it a little bit later in this podcast, but Hassabis keeps saying 2030. Other people have said, well, maybe we've already achieved it. Other people have said, no, we're not going to get there. It all depends on these tests, but they keep changing the tests. But I think what the real story is that, Microsoft kept the investment, kept getting paid by OpenAI for anything that's on their cloud, and started to provision other models onto their cloud. So now Microsoft is a reseller of multiple.
Yeah, distribution.
They are distribution all of a sudden. So they've kept their value as a distributor. They've kept their investment, which is now worth quite a lot of money. And they're sort of in the best of all worlds. So the trial, I mean, we started out here with the trial, and I think probably move on from it. But it's a great circus. It's all the biggest people in the AI industry are involved in this trial one way or the other. And I think the point is it probably doesn't matter what the judge rules at the end of the day. I mean, it matters incredibly to OpenAI because if all of that stock has to go back into a nonprofit, makes it awfully hard to IPO, makes it hard for Microsoft to monetize. They've already hedged their bets
Yeah, they adjusted.
to a
Yeah.
large degree, but but the OpenAI corporation can't really hedge its bets. It's going to be fundamentally changed if the judge rules one way or the other. And I don't think Elon Musk's life changes one iota. This
Well,
is
he's giving his money to the charity. Now, I think Elon, this is my read between the lines, and then we can move on because I kind of want to go to the distribution thing because I think you said something really interesting here. But I think Elon really just wants Sam out. I think if
correct.
a judge said, "Hey, let's settle this thing. We're going to ban that guy. He's out. He's out. You get your 44 million back. You put it in the charity, and we're going to look the other way. Let this company go private." I think Elon would walk out with a victory there. I don't see it. There's no purity in this deal.
I would say this. I think Elon's already won. No matter what happens in the courtroom, I think Elon's won. I think he has exposed Altman for exactly what he is and exactly what he's done. Because at the end of the day, you could like Elon or dislike Elon based on politics, based on his brashness, based on his sometimes frat boy humor. I mean, there's lots of reasons to dislike Elon as a human being based on his 24 kids or whatever
Yeah.
with 17 baby mamas. Like whatever sin you think he's committed, probably right. Maybe you don't like that he smokes pot. Like whatever it is that you don't like about him, you can find a reason. But I don't think there's a soul on earth that could argue that the guy hasn't had a profound effect on industries, on the space industry, on the car or auto
It's
industry.
everything.
I mean, what he's accomplished is shocking and unbelievable for one human being. So I think you compare and contrast that with Scam Altman, right? And then what he's done, which is basically talked a lot of people into working with him, and then they get there, and then they very quickly, sort of reverse path and say, we need a divorce. Like I got to get out of here. And at some point you sort of run out of people. Now, he will have enough money that he'll probably never run out of people, but the ability to attract billions and billions and billions of dollars to do stuff on the scale that guys like Elon are doing it is probably not available to him anymore, is my guess. And I think that's a win for Elon. So anyway, let's move on. Let's talk about distribution. We've written about distribution. I would say that when we first got back together, I mean, we've been friends for, over a decade, but when we sort of caught up in the fall of 24, talked about distribution being the most important thing.
Yeah, I think I don't know if you want me to jump in.
Yeah. Let's hear it.
Yeah, I mean, I've always thought distribution was everything. Just from an early age when I started working in the creative space, specifically music, you really had to have distribution because I got really early started making records with bands. If you made a record, there was no internet. So literally you needed physical distribution. You needed to ship 50 LPs to Des Moines, Iowa, 38 to like Detroit. If you didn't have that distribution, and there was these middlemen that used to be called rackers that would actually buy a bunch of stuff and rack your music.
Yeah. Jobbers and rackers.
Yeah, job. And so like I'm old, but no one knows that, right? No one in their 20s understand that that is the core to it. And so when I got into software, I mean, software was also distributed that way. I got into free software where you download free software, and then you go to conventions, and people would have their software, and you would get software over a table in a conference hall. And so the internet changed all that, but the fundamentals are still there. We just talked about it. Microsoft is a distributor of software. All of these companies had no real consumer AI game. When ChatGPT came up, they all freaked out because they realized that we're a distributor. We don't have anything. We're never going to make anything. Oh my God, what are we going to do? And they sort of married up with Sam or this or that, because they had nothing to distribute. Amazon's just catching up. The game is always distribution. So where I'm at, and I sent you a Michael Saylor quote. I don't know if you listened to it.
Yeah, of course.
But at the end of the day, he was talking about Bitcoin and all this stuff. It's like if you don't have distribution, you're nowhere. You're just nowhere. And what was funny when I'm listening to Michael Saylor, who I don't listen to generally, he was just like, it's distribution. If you're not popular or you're not this, you're not that. And so, my story of distribution and when I started Buzz Media was just all about focused on how do you become distribution for anything, for
Right.
an idea.
Yeah, and as you know, my career on, as an investor on Wall Street was I was an analyst, right? I was an analyst for radio companies, TV companies, outdoor advertising companies, cell tower companies. Every single thing I dealt with was distribution. I mean, it was all guys who had statutory licenses from the government to be able to reach every American in one form or another. I dealt with newspapers and other media companies, but obviously learned a lot about cable companies and all that stuff. So yeah, I totally get it, right? Last week as we were talking, Evan Spiegel sent out, there was a Lenny's podcast, and Evan Spiegel said, he goes, every Snap feature got cloned and
Yep.
was redistributed. He also said that something interesting, that in basically the previous decade, there was only like sort of 2 apps that actually hit mainstream, and it was Snap and TikTok. And that kind of it, despite an unbelievable amount of investment. Now, companies did well, but none of them broke through and ended up as, one of the top couple apps on your phone, because they were all owned by guys who already owned distribution, right? It was sort of,
Yeah,
Google
you can't.
has,
Yeah, you literally
you can't break through.
Yeah, you can't.
And I think what he failed to mention, of course, is that the businesses are the ones that did break through all of a sudden. So OpenAI, ChatGPT broke through, Claude broke through, all the other ones. I guess you could. He probably missed Twitter, right? I mean, Twitter is.
Yeah. Twitter's it's interesting in the world of consumer apps and social media, microblogging and stuff like that. It's different, but
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, but you could argue maybe that one broke through. But at the end of the day, what we're dealing with in AI is you're dealing with all of these companies, and each one of them effectively has to pay somebody something. There's almost none of them that are unto themselves except for Google, because Google already owned the distribution. So if you're Anthropic, you're in bed with AWS and a couple other people. If you're OpenAI, you're in bed with Microsoft, primarily, and you're paying them for compute and you're paying them for distribution to some degree, certainly enterprise distribution. If you're Grok, you're sort of in the second tier, but you have a partner that has great distribution, and that will help distribute you.
Yeah, yes.
And so they're all paying you, and I use the sort of the Goodfellas, where you had the bamboo lounge and Ray Liotta's voicing over, and he said the guy needs some help, and he goes, well, now he's got Paulie as his partner. Business not good, fuck you, pay me. And it's just, no matter what, you have to pay the guy every Friday, because he is protecting your interests. He is making sure that you're alive. And I think that's to some degree what you're seeing. If Google just took OpenAI off of Copilot, just took ChatGPT off of Copilot and said, sorry, it's just not available. We don't
Google. You mean
sorry,
Microsoft?
if Microsoft took it off Copilot, not available. Sorry. I mean, what happens to OpenAI's numbers then? Like the main guys that are paying them all of a sudden disappear.
Yeah.
Because your distributor decides, it's the same thing. You see it all the time on, you turn on your TV and ESPN's not there one day, and it's a big blue screen that says, we haven't come to an agreement on pricing. And then there's the fight. What matters more, my cable company or ESPN to me?
I mean, it's yeah. I mean, and by the way, a lot of people get pissed. I forgot what I was getting blocked on games last year sometime, and I was like, what is going on? This is ridiculous. Like, I want to watch the sports team. Like, why can't I get it? I think YouTube lost some games.
Yeah. They all do. I mean, you're in LA. I think all of those guys had fights with the Dodgers for a while.
Yeah.
And that was, that became a sort of cause celeb. I mean, those guys, they paid so much money for the team, and the main reason isn't that they were going to sell more tickets or beer at Dodger Stadium. The main reason was that there was a media, company attached to that that was going to make money.
I think that's where younger business people just don't understand that, like, everything they're doing is a distribution game. Like, if you're making an independent video game, Steam is going to be your number one distributor. You have to curry favor inside the Steam community. and get distributed. If you're making music, you got to be in Spotify in a certain way, or and you need to be distributed through the social networks. If you're Dodgers, you need to sell your rights to distributors. If you're selling any liquor, you need a local distributor. Like, it's just, everything is about distribution. And I think Salesforce, Atlassian, Amazon, these are big distributors of software. And frankly, their main product isn't even that good anymore. You know what I mean? And so they're just distributors, and
They just
it
have a massive installed base, so they're again, do you like your cable company? The answer is always no, right?
I don't
They're
even care about them.
right. You
Yeah.
don't care about them. They're just substrate. They're a utility. They're there. It's sort of like, do you like your electric company? Of course you don't like your electric company. I mean, you in particular don't like your electric company, but my electric bills are enormous for no service whatsoever. So you sort of look at it and go, but here's the thing I want to talk about with distribution, because I think you see it in the AI world, you see it in the software, but I want to talk about it as it regards the venture capital
I
business.
think exactly. I think we should go there.
And I think it's sort of broken. A little history, right? I know Fred Wilson, reasonably well. I have friends who know him quite well, but I know him. I know some of his partners. This guy wrote a blog, an original blog, AVC, and he wrote it like every day for like 10,000 days in a row. It's literally unbelievable, the fact that discipline this, that Fred had to write that. But Fred wrote it. Paul Graham, wrote his pieces. Mark Suster was writing his pieces out on the West Coast. And these guys were not just venture capitalists, not just investors, but they were media franchises. If you were building a business in the mid-teens here, you were reading those guys every day on some sort of RSS feed, or you were getting an email from them. But there was almost nobody who was in the investing and or company building business in the VC world that wasn't looking at that stuff.
Since you're talking history, I'll throw in some my own history. I was fundraising my company, Buzz Media, was called BuzzNet, in probably late 2003, and we met a young VC named Jeff Clavier. He'd started a blog, because we were a blogging platform, you know what I mean? And he started a blog called Soft Tech VC.
Yeah.
I think
I
I
read
don't
it.
know. I mean, I'll ask Jeff, maybe he could tweet me out or something like that. But I don't know if he was like the first, because there was Scoble. Robert Scoble was Scobalizer. There were some early, like, he wasn't a VC, but there were people talking about our space. And Soft Tech, Jeff started his, and I remember then started reading, not even Paul Graham, but Fred Wilson. Mark Suster came a lot later, like, honestly, to tell you the truth. But I followed all that. I was friendly with all of them back then, and it was an interesting time. But it was clear that position was working.
Yes. Yeah, they were thought leaders before thought leadership was a concept. And because of what they were writing, because there was a void in the market, and they lent their voices and their thoughts to the void. And and quite frankly, they were good writers and they were smart people, and they were seeing good deal flow, and so it made sense. And I think if you fast forward, from there, it was always, if you were a VC and you were let's say you were a company going to VCs, you were always looking and saying, all right, can I get money? And then if you were successful at getting money, the question is, who should I take money from? And, it was, what's the signal that I'm sending the market with this particular investor? So, again, back far enough, if you could get money from Sequoia, sure, take money from Sequoia today. Take money from Sequoia, of course. From Benchmark, or, I mean, you want to really
Yeah,
go
it was a
back,
signal.
there
That
was
was
a
like
signal,
it was a
Kleiner,
distribution signal.
right. Kleiner Perkins was a signal. Smart guys, you don't hear from them anymore, right? Clean tech, kind of hurt them badly, or crushed them, or killed them potentially. And now there's different signals. But I think the issue was always, I can get you in to see somebody. I can connect the dots. My Rolodex is sort of golden, and I can help your business. And then the question was, would they in fact do that? Would they actually be a services company? And I think all that changed with Andreessen Horowitz. So, A16Z comes along. You have two founders who have had enormous success before they start a venture fund. My guess is that neither one of them were hurting for money and didn't need the management fee, and looked at Michael Ovitz's famous, kind of service business at Creative Artists, and said, we're going to do that for the Silicon Valley.
I mean,
world.
Michael joined them. Do you know what I
Yes.
mean? Like,
Yeah.
he ran the book there, I think.
Yeah. And I think so if they raised, $1 billion or $2 billion, they had 20 or $40 million to spend. And I'm guessing they didn't pay themselves generously. They probably plowed all of that back into hiring staff and hiring community managers and bloggers and writers and all the services um, that a company would need to help grow. And they've built that over the course of, 10 plus years at this point. And so they actually have distribution. They can platform you. They can get you in front of your product in front of hundreds of thousands of people. And I think there's a new sort of crop of these people. Again, I got into it over the weekend yesterday with Harry Stebbings, who is, from 20 VC. The guy's got a great podcast, the best guests on, does a, good job of it all, really good job of it all. And he's a super young guy, and he's sort of created a little micro fund, or, maybe it's probably a bigger fund by now. And, part of the reason to take money from him is that, he has distribution. He has enormous distribution. But he said something that was really interesting yesterday on the podcast. And it said that a $400 million ARR company growing 30%, quote, used to be great. It's not anymore. You need $1 billion plus growing 40% to generate real outcomes. And anything below that risks becoming a good company with a bad IPO. And that was, and that hit me, like, it hit me hard. And I'm a cynical guy, but I think I'm also a realist who can step out of the bubble every once in a while. And to me, that's a VC AI bubble talking.
Totally.
And I went back and I sort of, wrote back and I said, look, you have to have perspective. There are very, very, very few companies in the world that will ever reach $400 million of ARR with 30% growth. It is great beyond anybody's imagination. And if anyone thinks that is a bad outcome, it is only because they overpaid in the last round.
That's right. You're probably right.
And
did he reply?
Well, he didn't reply, but Jason Lemkin, from SaaStr, replied him almost immediately. And I was reading what he said. He said, 100% agree in an absolute sense. It's amazing and better than I ever did. It just happens to break 90% of the current VC model. It didn't 5 to 6 years ago. So this is a sort of a top tier guy, top tier SaaS investor and commentator, basically admitting that the business is broken. And it's broken because the VCs are bidding up companies at valuations where basically only a $1 trillion exit or a, multiple, tens to hundreds of billions of dollars of exit makes the math work. But, if you enter, if you need 10x because you need something to return your fund and you enter at 100 billion or 50 billion, you need a 500 billion to $1 trillion exit. But how many companies are there?
They're bidding themselves up. So it's like the ratios have gotten insane. And I think for me, from being a founder, I hated when they were like, just take more money. You know what I mean? Take 10 on 40, not 5 on 20. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
You're like, and then you get this huge valuation and you're fucked.
Yes.
You're fucked.
Yeah.
You're like, you're stuck. And so I think that the game, and if you're like a rock star VC, you want the step ups it becomes unreasonable. And what Stebbing says is like, it's like, just no one's there's maybe 5 companies every 3 years that get those sort of returns and runs. But as a VC, I think you're just like, that's all I'm looking for. So they wreck the market.
I think there's 5 companies every decade, that get those type of returns. And I think though that, what's interesting is that, Shelley Palmer, who, writes some interesting stuff, for the crowd.
Yeah.
Sort of said it like, it's a prisoner's dilemma for these guys.
It is.
Like,
I've been there.
Yeah. You cannot, if you're Anthropic and these guys, you cannot stop spending on compute. I mean, Google said it. If we had more compute, we would have made more money. This is a multi-trillion-dollar company that says we're capacity constrained. Apple says we would have made more money if we had more Mac Minis on hand. We fundamentally missed the fact that everyone was going to go out and buy a Mac Mini. So things are breaking. Like, smart companies are underinvested somehow because they just didn't see the demand coming. But that there's just a couple of these guys that can do that. So they're stuck in a capital cycle where they have to continue to invest. Now, again, I would also argue that if you take a look back at history, software in general, small amounts of capital go in, large amounts of revenue come out, full, easy distribution, cheap, zero cost distribution, large margins, and lots of free cash. So you value them very highly. And now all of a sudden, these same companies that have been bid up to, 30, 40 times earnings, or in some cases in the private market, 30, 40 times revenue, have to spend, we're looking at CapEx budgets of
Yeah, it's very,
approaching $1 trillion for the hyperscalers
yeah.
to reach that same level of sort of software business margins and revenue that they had before. So what are those things ultimately worth? Are they really ultimately worth 30 to 40 times earnings when they're already at almost $1 trillion? Really, really hard to justify that.
To me though, we're at a different place with software because, and I saw this shift. Everything I used to do with software was local, right? Like we would rack and stack our machines. We'd put AC in. Everything was just fully vertical. There was no cloud. There was no public cloud. And as soon as you shifted to public cloud, you'd be like, okay, I'm shifting my CapEx to OpEx. My OpEx is now $50K a month. And a lot of SaaSes came to be able to build a rational business model. Now you're like, okay, I have $100,000 OpEx on my cloud software, but I may have infinite costs on my inference costs.
Right.
Right. So every software company is faced with this, like, okay, I got my cloud cost and I got my inference cost. My inference cost is not predictable. Like, I don't know how much my users are going to use it. I don't know how to price it. And so I think there's a really interesting problem for founders and VCs and cloud companies. We don't know how to actually price all of this compute and when you go way back to where you have to get it, you have to buy nuclear power or energy or, gas
Yeah.
and cement, and you have to build these big things, and those aren't built. Scarcity is setting them high. But if you play it out, maybe in 5 years or 10 years, we might have a glut and everything drops. So it's like a really interesting point in time right now
Yeah,
with all
look,
this.
power is obviously a very long-tailed. You can't just add it to the grid, right? And
No, you
Microsoft
can't.
just put up a bunch of money to restart 3 Mile Island, right? It's like,
That's insane.
at basically guaranteed prices that are 50% higher than spot prices right now because you just couldn't get the power. It's that much power at the spot price. So it would just fundamentally change the spot prices. So they're going to put up the money and just say, we know what it'll cost us. It'll just cost us more. Yeah. So it's a little crazy. And I think for the companies themselves, if you're starting a company, I think the distribution, to just get back to the distribution for a second, is I think you want to take money, forget about optimizing on price and dollars and all the rest of the stuff. I think you want to optimize around the guys that can actually get you distributed.
Yeah.
Who can get your product in front of the maximum number of people, because it is only product success at the end of the day
Okay.
that makes you success.
Okay, so that brings us back to distribution. Working with a blogger or a podcaster that has massive distribution. Look, when I worked for Ashton Kutcher, he was seen as distribution in a sense, right?
Yeah, of course.
We had 40 million subscribers on 2 different networks, and he was a star, and he was a smart guy and a lovable person. So everyone was like, hey, like, look, if I get Ashton, I get in a Twitter feed here. That was distribution. And before I was leaving, we were building A+, which was a newsletter business right on top of that. So I clearly saw it as distribution. If you have a great distributor, a great distributor can get money. I'd rather take money from a great distributor at a better valuation than a pure, just like, hey, I can get money from hedge fund X or Y or Z. Right?
Yeah.
So I think
if Joe Rogan wants to give you money and give you a shout out on the Rogan show, and you're gonna give him a discount on your price, it is probably incredibly well worth it.
100%. 100%.
And or again, Harry Stebbings, right? He probably gets into a lot of great deals simply because he has distribution and is now a self-fulfilling prophecy at this point. And good for him for seeing it, and good for him for doing it, because
that's what's driving us.
Yeah.
It's like if my position is and I saw this firsthand when I was working with Ashton, I've seen this firsthand when I was running Buzz Media. We reached, like 1 out of 6 teenagers in America for almost a decade. If you have distribution, you have everything. Doesn't matter. I could have gotten into many, many deals, but I was too focused on the details of what I was doing and not the macro. And that was a learning thing for me, but no more. We are distributors. We are going to build a distribution business, period. Now, distribution businesses can be built on macro and micro. Like, if I'm a micro distributor in a micro channel,
Yeah.
that's still good.
It's great.
I mean,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It's like the VC
It's
world's a small world. You know what I mean?
right.
It's not like you need to be, you know, Joe Rogan or Tucker Carlson, you know what I mean? Or Candace Owens, who are massive distributors. I mean, they're distributing weird stuff. But I mean, but like if you're like Lenny's newsletter, you're a massive distributor in a small world. It's great. It's great business.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
We're sold.
Yeah, exactly. We're all sold on that. So let's move on to you know what I'd say is sort of the last hit of the show here, because we'll run out of time sooner or later, to use a radio term, the hit. You mentioned being in the music business.
Yep.
I want to talk about Mozart, right? And I want to talk about people have seen Amadeus.
Now, most people probably haven't.
Okay, so most people haven't seen Amadeus.
You should tell them it's a movie. It's on Netflix, probably.
It's almost heretical to me that people haven't seen it. It won Best Picture, et cetera.
But in like 1984 or something like
That's
that.
true. And I'm a
Like
classical
35 fucking 40 years ago.
I'm a classical music fanatic. So it is fundamentally a movie about Mozart and his life. Mozart being a musical genius, and as told through the eyes of Salieri, who was the court composer at the time, who could see the genius in Mozart, was frustrated that he himself was not a genius. He could recognize genius, but he had none of it himself. And I've always thought about software as really, I think there's two facets to coding, to writing software, and it's probably the same with musicianship, which is that there is a rote nature to it. I can use Claude Code, I can use Cowork, can use a bunch of these things to effectively now write code, even though I'm not an engineer, I'm not a coder historically, but I am not an artist when it comes to doing it. I learned this very early on. I was tasked with writing a word processor in BASIC, and that's how far back I'm talking, the early 80s, right? So the Amadeus era. And I wrote it. It worked. It was 4,000 lines long of, go to and return and all sorts of weird commands.
Exactly.
And my friend wrote one in like 600 lines of code, and it worked a lot better. And I was like, okay, I see. And I think we've talked about AI being a force multiplier, cognitive leverage. I think we've called it numerous times. And I think that everybody just got sort of 10x'd on their ability to code, right? The LLMs are fundamentally devices that are trained on text, models that are trained on text, and they are predicting the next token. They're predicting the next letter, the next word, next line, et cetera. And they're unbelievably good at that. And coding, which they're able to train on with, massive GitHub repositories, is something that they can do incredibly, incredibly well. So if I need to code something, it gets done if I can explain it. I don't need to understand Python. All I know is that the Python script that I wrote the other day works, and it's doing its job exactly as I planned it to. And where it made errors, we fixed. But there's no art to it. As someone said, when everybody can code, the real value is knowing what to code. It's really having that taste. It's really having that kind of, art to it. And then, and so if you have these sort of, Karpathy guys, they're the 100x guys. They were already 10x and now they're 100x.
Yeah.
And they are, and so if they were 10x before over the guys who are 1, you add AI to them and they become 100x and the other guys become 10. Karpathy's still 10x everybody else, but now he's 100 times better than the average human being. And he's 90 points better, where he was 9 points better or 10 points better than the average coder before. And now he's 90 points better. So his advantage is just multiplied exponentially. And the average guy, average coder is now much more valuable. And the average human being who has no clue about any of this stuff is still back basically where the Emperor Franz Josef was in the movie, where he, Mozart played him a new opera and said, "What do you think, sire?" And he said, "Too many notes." And Mozart asked him, of course, if His Highness would kindly tell me which notes to cut, I'd be happy to remove them. And, and he just sort of looked and said, "I don't understand. Too many notes. Just, make it shorter." And I think that's where a lot of people, I think that's where a lot of people are.
Yeah, people. I agree. I mean, first of all, as being a coder who's lost their touch, AI has given me a lot of opportunity, right? But there's a craft in coding and problem solving hand to hand that was uniquely fun and curious, and you could lose 50, 100 hours just playing around with it and refactoring it. And it was a intellectual, like, just game
Yeah.
of chess that when you're playing with AI, you just don't engage in that. And so if Mozart's that sort of person and you're this other guy, that's kind of evaporating, even for the Karpathys. Like, if you're not touching the code, your 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 markdown files of describing how to solve the problem is where that is going. So it's shifting, right? But for most people, they just go, like, they look at a paragraph and they're like, there's so many words in this paragraph. Like, what is that? What are you saying? And it may have actually made a really, quite frankly, eloquent argument that you need to use, but you just want to understand it,
Right.
you
Yeah,
know?
it's
And
like I'll go back to the another old movie, since I'm full of movies in my mind today. Is I don't know whether you ever saw the movie Back to School with Rodney Dangerfield in it.
you're really pulling up the bangers from the
Yeah,
90s.
and
Like,
in
they were
the 80s.
conceived
Yeah.
in the 70s and made in the 80s. They're
Hey, listen,
written.
Oingo Boingo was played live in that
Like,
movie.
no one even
But
knows who Oingo Boingo is.
right, well, it's
Though they know
great.
Danny Elfman, maybe.
They
But
know Danny Elfman, of course,
yeah.
because they've seen the movies that he's scored. But anyway, you go back to it, and Rodney Dangerfield goes back to school, and he actually gets a report back on Kurt Vonnegut story, and basically the English professor says you don't understand, and in fact it cuts to Kurt Vonnegut, who's sitting there, who had actually written the book report for and I think that
Yeah.
is kind of emblematic of what you're seeing right now. I mean, most of the people who are using these models, they're being given a Ferrari and they know how to drive a Ford Pinto.
Or not at all, yeah.
Or not at all. And like they're doing super simplistic stuff on, kind of world-class technology. And the only people who are really pushing the edge of these models are probably coders. And that's where and then that's why you just continually see more and more coding get done using models, is because they're pushing the envelope consistently.
Yeah, and so I always been saying this, and I've been saying this for a really long time, and you probably have heard me say, it's like, if you follow the engineering track, you're going to see where consumers going to go, right? And right now, it's just where AI does its best work is with really smart people that understand how to direct software engineers as a team, or now software engineers as AI, and you can get this really terrific result. That same approach is going to come from modern business next. But first will be like, how do we instrument coding? And second, how do we instrument the sort of the white collar business, right? And you just saw Harvey, I think, was just bought by Microsoft.
Yeah, it's Harvey and Legora. I mean, they're both, as someone said, they're both basically Raptors freight.
Right. But the rapper is the elegance, right? And people were criticizing rappers running it. And I was saying to people, I was like, hey, as a software engineer and thinker, you're rapping. That's all you've been doing is rapping. You've been rapping stuff, libraries. I mean, it's like the rapper is the product. Like, I don't know what else to say. And so, like, if you're going to sit there and say, I'm going to build the best legal rapper, and people are going to crap on it, I just think that they were uneducated. It's like, no, building a harness around legal is extraordinarily hard. And I actually think that more modern businesses, like really big businesses, and we're explaining this, Harry, all the time. If you're a very big business, you need to think about what your wrapper is that's specific to your business that you need to build, because buying it may not be an option, because there might not be an entrepreneur that's going to build you that.
Yeah, look, I talked to the CMO of Weedmaps at breakfast on Friday morning, and I went through our workflow on how we go through, hundreds of articles and newsletters and tweets and everything every day to come up with, a bunch of stories, and we then slice and dice those stories for different output formats. So whether it's a website where we publish a 5,000 word essay on heat, and then the Beehive newsletter comes out and it's 900 words, and then it comes down to a tweet. And so you
and an image
and it's a lot of input. And if the average company would look at that, they'd go, it's too hard. I don't, if we wanted to productize that, we would have to put a nice wrapper around all of that and say, here's the workflow and here's how to make it easy.
I mean, hedge fund operators, which I know you've been a member of, and know many, they are distilling so much data to actually make a bet. And I heard a really interesting story, and I don't know where we're gonna end on this, but it's like in Mozart and all this, but it's like hedge fund guy sends a associate into the Middle East to count ships floating across the Hermes Pass. Is maybe it's the only guy that's really got real eyes on how many boats are going through, right? That hedge fund guy that did that is far more informed than anyone else. Or the guy that's flying satellites over and looking at how many cars in a parking lot. Those guys understand that, and they understand how important alpha data is. The average business operator doesn't, but they should, and they're going to need a better system because their competitor who gets a smarter business person who's X and now is going to be 100X because they know how to like orchestrate AI technology, they're going to outperform you, period. And what's that going to do is that they're going to be a Mozart and they're going to understand it and they're going to get a better set of distributions and they're going to win the business.
Yeah, I think people, if AI to some degree, as it's currently construed, is pattern matching, right? It's sort of I put in some context and it matches those patterns and it spits out something. Those who see things, I'm going to say, uniquely, it may not be differently, but it's sort of uniquely, and have that insight faster are the ones that win. At the end of the day, you can give me a piano and I'm not going to, and an infinite amount of time, and I am not going to turn into Mozart. I'm
Me
not
too.
going to, I'm
Me
not going to
too.
be deaf and be able to compose Beethoven's Ninth Symphony while deaf. By the way, again, I'm a classical music nut, but if anyone listens to that and thinks that Beethoven wasn't the greatest like sound engineer in the world or the greatest like you think about like all the guys who produce music these days, and they're at their boards with all the dials and stuff like that. This guy live produced a piece of music that's being played 250 years later with a 100+ person orchestra while not being able to hear the music. I mean, think about
He
that.
probably saw it.
I mean, yeah, it's just unbelievable. Michelangelo basically said, David was in the slab of marble. I just
But that's the
cut
same
away.
with code. That's the same with
Right.
code. It's like, hey, like the
Exactly.
code was there. I just had to I had to refactor it, a
Right.
1,000 times to get it to be this way.
And I think the next, Michelangelo or David or whoever, they're out there, and I think they're, to a large degree, the ones that are gonna get funded a lot and quickly are probably all sitting in these labs. They're all sitting in frontier labs right now. And I said in sort of the pregame show here before we started, like, the guy who built Claude Code,
Boris. Yep.
Cowork Boris, like, how much money do you think Boris could go collect from Sand Hill Road? Like, if he said this afternoon on a tweet, "I'm starting my own lab. I'm gonna be building products. I'm open for offers." My guess is the guy would have over $1 billion of term sheets on his desk by tomorrow morning.
Yeah, and I a couple things there. I think he's got his own distribution, right? Because he's done it, right? So he's kind of got this thing. But if you really look at like I don't know Boris, but let's not talk about him because it's too
Yeah,
specific.
yeah.
But it's like all those VCs wouldn't have done any of that if they were just funding a regular coder at a company that did some good work. It's right now there's such a desperate need for people that know how to like do something, but like that, he's got distribution now. That's why he's getting the funding.
Yes.
But if a guy who's just said, "Hey, I wrote this wrapper around this thing and it's become very popular," we're discounting luck and timing there. And I think that's where no disrespect to anyone that's doing that. I'm just saying that you also said VC's broken. They're chasing these things. It's like that's a chase. It doesn't mean that happens again just because that guy did it. That happened because it happened right then and there in caught. So, I have a little counterpoint to your in the labs. I think the Frontier Labs guys, I think the researchers are going to continue to research and come up with better training and better architectures. Because really what we're up against with LLMs and all this world is like just the fundamental architecture. Like we're hitting a space where it's like literally the architecture of the model, the way you do RL, the way the computing cycle's done, the way the memory's set up, the way that you hydrate everything orchestrated across a physical systems is at a busting point and there's something that's going to change. Those guys are very valuable. But if they made it like 17% more efficient, really where I think the magic's going to happen is in product thinkers. Like really, again, not saying Sam Altman's a genius here, but releasing ChatGPT is the genius. It's the LLM technology that they released on was still the magic. So really where I think is who's going to be given the opportunity at an entrepreneur level by investors who are not chasing those same crazy returns, that are saying, hey, you've got a really interesting product innovation using AI technology, and let's give it a shot. And maybe it's going to do 10x and it's going to be $100 million business. So I think there's another set of investors that are not going to play at the researcher game where they're going to give a guy $1 billion an idea. They're going to give you $5 or $10 million because they think you could build $100 million business or even a $50 million business because you have an innovation on a problem using this technology. And I think that there's a lot of bets. I think the VCs are going to go up here, and I think all these micro bets are going to turn and are going to be valuable and important for users.
Yeah, and I would argue that what you just described is basically what's been described as Anthropic's workflow, right, for releasing products.
Yeah.
It's just they now have an enormous amount of distribution, and they have the ability to go through dog food, test, and then ultimately distribute as many of these products as they want in as many sectors as they want. And they can iterate and do it incredibly quickly with total distribution the same day that they release it. So you're going to have to think long and hard about what you're building. And like you said, it comes down to some degree is like who sees it, who has the taste to see what the world needs. And then how do you do it so well that you either get bought up or that other people don't copy you, or they do copy you and it just doesn't matter because you're just doing it better. And that's a hard road to walk because
It is.
people will copy.
Of course.
People will, with distribution, if it's a really good idea, people with distribution will copy your idea almost instantly.
We're in that, like, I would say if you look at the music business, it's very much going to become like the software business. It's like as soon as it's just a set of single producers. There's a set of single writers that are writing and producing all the pop music in the world right now, period. It's like, it's hundreds of people. It's not tens of thousands. It's hundreds of people, period. And then you get some random beat maker out there who gets swooped up by the same hundreds. And they're like, hey, write these beats here. We're in the software business, the same place. It's like everything sounds the same. Everything does the same thing. All the same problems exist. And there's nothing new in business right now where you're like, I got a new problem. I mean, there's no new problems. Right?
There's just better ways to solve old problems.
And so it comes down to distribution, meaning I like these guys. Actually, I think when you're selling software to people, it's like it really comes down to hey, do I trust these people? Which we started the podcast here. Do you trust these guys? Do you like these guys? Because you're going to be giving them $50,000 a month, or $10,000 a month, or $5,000 a month. Do I trust these guys? Do I like these guys? Because at the end of the day, you have to that's your money's going to them, and some people still have that buying power. So it's going to be an interesting place. AI is definitely going to disrupt the world. Distribution, I think, is key. And VC's broken. That's this podcast, right?
Yeah. Look, to a large degree, because of the sort of the hyperscalers and the fact that if you're a VC, you need to be in them so that you can turn around and get more money for your next fund.
Yeah.
And because it's the only thing that people are funding these days, and so it's really hard if you're sitting there going, I'm going to fund consumer software or something like that. It's like, okay, great, but what
consumer's great right now. I think consumers want fun stuff, so we'll leave it there. Maybe we talk about consumers. Maybe we'll talk about how to make sure your high school student or your college student has some sort of plan going forward, because a lot of people keep asking us that. So we'll leave it there. You got any postscripts, Harry? I know you're going to go play some golf or something like that.
I got a padel match and a golf game later today. So today's an awesome, it's like a 10+ day, right?
All right.
Get to do all that with your family and friends. Life is good. There's no, but when we hang up here, there's no more AI for the day, or at least not till tonight. It's all
not till tonight. All right. I'm gonna mess around with some software. It's gloomy out here in LA. I don't know what else I'm gonna do. But it's good seeing you.
It's only 70 degrees and not fully sunny. But yeah, I got it. I'm going to go out to my 52 degree weather here. But
yeah. All right. Well, listen, have a good golf game. I'll talk to you later tonight. Peace out.
See ya.
Bye.